the irrigation side, or the sprinkler irrigation side, I and then my colleague LarryRupp will talk about low water use landscaping. And the first thing to establish about low water use landscaping is that turf is not the bad guy. Okay, it's what we expect turf to do that it wasn't evolutionarily designed for, and that is to be green in an arid climate. That just doesn't work. So turf isn't the bad guy. And low water use landscapes are designed, they're not off the shelf. Design is fundamental to achieving any kind of low water use landscape. This is what I would consider a mindless landscape with turf grass, trees embedded, slope, water runs off too easily. A designed low water use landscape has three components, actually two components. Hardscape, meaning either concrete, pavement, or mulch that doesn't use water. And non-uniformity, because if you don't have a uniform landscape, you're not trying to have a uniform water application. And then plant selection for drought tolerance, and that really is the key, that if you really want to have savings, it's the type of plant that you put in. And this is a design landscape, and I couldn't resist a dig at California, right? The past year, I've been loving it every time I can say, we can do better than California. Okay, this is a turf terminator landscape, okay? A company out there said, give us your rebate, we'll put you in a low water use landscape, and they all look like this, okay? We can do a lot better than that. And one of the aspects that we can do better with is estimating a target of how much water a low water use landscape should have. And there's a new Irrigation Association standard. It's an ANSI standard, and then it was signed off by the American Society of Ag Engineers that allows us to estimate water demand based on evapotranspiration of any type of landscape. And there's only three categories: non-turf, trees and shrubs, turf grass, and then desert plants. So we can assign a value to the amount of water that any landscape has based on the spatial arrangement and cover, and then the type of plants in it. So for example, this is a colleague, Ann Spranger of ours, designed this where there's only 18% plant cover, the seasonal demand is 1,100 gallons, and that's 1 inch. Okay, so it's 8% of complete turf cover. Another concept, complete plant cover. 100% plant cover, but it's using adapted plants, and its water demand is only 7,500 gallons, or 17 inches of turf grass. And we can take that a step further to the Envision Utah landscape scenarios. I won't even try to fathom what the titles meant, but if you have 100% turf grass, on average, the evapotranspiration rate for the Wasatch Front is 40 inches. It's going to vary from year to year, anywhere from 36 up to about 44, but on average, 40 is a reasonable estimate. And then turf grass uses water at about 80% of reference evapotranspiration. I made some assumptions about what the percent area is in the plant types. But here you can bring it down to 28 inches by having less turf. Even less turf, you can go down to 25 inches. And I can't see a difference between this and that, the seagull and the quaking aspen, apart from one's a plant and one's an animal. But then they go down to the seagull lily, that's probably about 3 inches. So what happened to the other 22 inches in there? I don't know. But you can have a complete covered landscape using desert plants, and that would have a target water demand of 12 inches. So it's about the plants, but it truly is a design process.
My name's LarryRupp. I'm an extension landscape horticulture specialist at USU, and just wanted to talk a little bit about things from the plant side. As we've looked at, but before I get into that, I wanted to just make a comment. We've been doing this for, close to 25 years, maybe? About 25 years. And it may seem like it moves slow, but it moves. And for one, I'm very gratified to look back. I'm starting to get toward the end of my career, and I can look back and really see some changes that have been made. And if you don't believe that, all you got to do is walk out here and look at this garden, or look at the gardens at Jordan Valley, or any other of the water conservancy districts that have really made a committed effort to finding out more about what plant materials work, and then extending that information to the public. So it's great to be able to cooperate with them and to see things that have happened, and to see our students working at some of these places. As Roger mentioned, the plants are an important part of all this, and in some ways, what I wanted to take my time on today was maybe not so much talk about individual plants or what plants we have, but where we ought to go in the future. We've got these years behind us, but now this year for USU Extension, it's sort of we enter into a new phase, because the state has come forward through the state legislature to give us specific funding for looking at water conservation programs. So we're ready to launch into the next phase of what kinds of research and outreach and education and things that we need to be doing to enhance water conservation in the state. Obviously, there's a lot of great plant materials out there. There are people that are using them more and more, as has been mentioned. But we kind of run into some interesting things. One is that we've figured out that we're never going to be able to determine the exact amount of, well, we don't need to, nor should we determine the exact amount of water that each one of these plants use. But we can put them into these broad categories, as Roger mentioned, and be able to use them in landscaping and use them to save water. I think there's some other things that we need to look at as well, and that's what I'd like to go through, and I hope to get some feedback as we go into the discussion portion. But as we look at research priorities, I think one of the things, and this continues to be a problem, is weed control. When you think about, at least in Cache Valley, if I overwater my landscape, the water ends up out in Box Elder County probably, and somebody's watering their corn with it, so it's not all lost. But if it's lost to weeds, then it's gone. And weeds, I think, are sort of the ultimate waste of water that we might have in a landscape, as well as problems with public perception. So dealing with weed issues is one. Another one that's kind of popping up is the idea of shade gardens. We know that some plants do better in shade than in others, and should we be using this? Well, if we have them in a shade environment, are they going to use less water? The slide there on the right shows the north side of a building when the sprinklers were shut off, and the portion that was in the shade is still, the grass is green. The portion in the sun, the grass is gone dormant. Should this play a role in our landscapes in the future, and how much water can we save with it? We've had nurserymen that have said, kind of pushing the idea of we should be using more of these shade-tolerant plants and putting them in an environment where there is shade, and maybe that'll be a means of saving water, but we really don't know. Another aspect I think that we need to look at more of is water harvesting. This is a landscape and a building that was basically, I guess, more or less abandoned. And I thought, well, that's interesting. The lawn's dead, shrubs are dead, the tree's dead, but there's one shrub there that's nice and green and healthy. And I walked over there, and sure enough, there's a downspout from the roof that comes right down to that. Well, those kinds of things, should we be incorporating them more in design and looking at them, and how do we take advantage of those so that we can have plants that are alive but are using a minimum amount of water? Fabric mulches and mulches in general. I think when we started looking at low water landscapes, everybody jumped on board with the idea that mulches were very important. And one of the easiest ways seemed to be, well, let's put down some of these fabric mulches and we'll cover them with either bark chips or stone or whatever material. And when people asked, well, is this going to work long term or not, there was kind of a bit of humming and hawing, and no reason why it theoretically shouldn't. But now over time, we're starting to see that these fabrics may not be the panacea that we thought they were. And so I think mulches are still a key part, but how do we use mulches and perhaps get away from these fabrics and get more into a sustainable type of system that still gives us the weed control that we want, the cleanliness, the form in the landscapes without some of the drawbacks that we're starting to see with long-term use of some of these fabrics. Here's one that's kind of would be an ultimate goal if we could, and that's using water as a growth regulator. These two slides show two Jeffrey pines over in the Reno area, this one and this one. They're both planted at the same time. One is outside in the natural landscape getting natural rain. The other one was irrigated on the other side of the fence. They're both healthy, they're both surviving, they're both doing just fine. But the point is that can we get to a point where we can encourage more specific water use? And with the idea of, okay, I've got a more mature landscape, can I draw the amount of water use down so that maybe I'm not growing as much because I don't need it. But it gets real tricky because we have less margin for error, and we don't want to get into the situation where we start making recommendations that end up with dead landscapes and whatever problems might occur with that. Maybe just to end, one of the things we're coming at on a landscape point of view is an important philosophical difference. Oftentimes we think about plants and water use, and you have two sides going on. One is the agricultural side, and the other is the landscape side. And I think it's important to realize that on the ag side, what they're after is yield, okay? They're trying to get sustainable profitability. And on the landscape side, we really don't need that. What we're after is more using landscapes to maintain a quality of life. And so if I put shade over a landscape and the plants grow less and use less water, that's okay as long as I can maintain the quality of life that I want. If I can reduce the turf so there's turf for the kids to play on, but we don't have turf everywhere, that's okay because, again, it's the quality of life that we're after. So I would hope that as we move forward, I think you probably can't read that, but this kind of goes back to Roger's comment about California. I think California in some ways got a little carried away and threw out the baby with the bathwater. And this is a quote from Wallace Stegner, and he said I was nearly 12 before I saw either a bathtub or a water closet. And when I walked past my first lawn, I stooped down and touched its cool nap in awe and unbelief. I think I held my breath. I had not known that people anywhere lived with such grace. I think as we move forward with further ways at conserving water in the landscape, we can't forget that landscapes are there for a purpose, and they're a true benefit, and we at the Center for Water Efficient Landscaping are committed to keeping that benefit, but also saving water in the process. Thank you.